Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and today we have the May wrap up. And yes, I am talking about May books. I know it's currently July, but as you all know, I took like a month off of doing videos, and I did still really want to talk about the books I read in May. One, because I co-hosted the Mental Healthathon, which was amazing, and a massive thank you to Nicole for inviting me and Victoria to co-host with you. Had a really good time. I loved interacting with everybody, and I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit towards the end just because of some personal stuff, and one of the reasons why obviously I decided to take a break. But overall, I had a really good time and it was fun to chat along with you guys. So yeah, I did want to do this wrap up for that reason. Plus I just have like a weird, like, I need to complete it. Like, I'm a completionist, so like I don't like to miss a wrap up. So I feel like I'm going to do this now. Next Monday's video will be my June wrap up, so look out for that one. And yes, for now, let's keep rocking and rolling. So I'm going to talk to you about the books that I read in May. So some stats first. In May, I read 14 books, which totaled 3,873 pages, and it was a total of 3.8 ratings wise. That was my like average rating. I had a really good reading month in general. There was some things that I didn't love, and there was a couple of DNFs, I think. But overall, it was a pretty good month. I read 3 5-star books, 3 4-star books, 3 3-star books, 1 2-star book, and 4 DNFs. And of the books I read, I had 6 non-fiction, 2 fantasy, 2 thriller, 1 dystopian, 1 horror, 1 poetry, and 1 romance. So a bit of a mixture. It definitely was a very high non-fiction reading month for me, and actually I've noticed I think about 25% of my reading this year has been non-fiction, so I feel like this has definitely been the year of non-fiction, and I am loving it. It is definitely one of my favourite genres to read from, and especially this month it's been great reading mental health non-fiction as well. But yes, let us get started, and I will talk to you about the books I read in chronological order. So the first book that I read in May was a reread, and this was an audiobook. This actually counted towards Mental Healthathon, but it wasn't one of the original ones that I picked for the prompt, so this was kind of like a bonus one. And I read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This is a book that I've read before. I listened to the audiobook of this. I've talked recently about the fact that I've kept a few of the books that I have on audio that I want to listen to because I always read along with the audiobook. So yes, I enjoyed this one. I ended up giving this a 5-star. I enjoyed it a lot more this time around. I think last time I gave it a 3 or a 4, and for some reason it just really resonated with me at the moment. I don't know what it was about it this time that made me just really enjoy it, but for some reason I connected more with the characters. I think partly it was probably because I've now seen the movie, so whether I was connecting more with the story because I could picture the people a bit better. And also for some reason, the first time I read it, I remember thinking that Augustus was completely insufferable and I hated his character. But this time around, I just really enjoyed it. And I don't know if that's just because of like, I'm projecting on the fact that I know kind of what happens in this book, or whether it's something that I don't know. I'm really not sure the reasoning for that. I just know that for some reason I absolutely loved this read. It got me really emotional. I did actually cry on this, and like I don't really cry with books very often. So yeah, this was a wonderful read. If you don't know, this follows 2 teenagers, Augustus Waters and Hazel. I can't remember what her surname is. I think is it Lancaster, or have I just made that up completely? I probably have, but let's be honest. But anyway, and they basically meet at a support group for kids who have cancer, and it's about them and their journey, and about their cancer. Is also about their other things that happen in their lives. It's really good. It doesn't necessarily just make them a walking cancer diagnosis, which I think is really important, and I really enjoyed reading that part of it. It's very, very difficult to read. It's quite sad, but it is really well written, and it's one of the reasons why I then went on and read a lot more John Green. I'm really glad I reread this one. I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook as well. I can now give this copy away, but I'm really, really glad that I reread this. Okay, so the next one, we have a weird thing. I don't know if I've mentioned this in a video. I can't really remember, but The Shining. I read The Shining, well, I started to read The Shining. I read 380 pages of The Shining on my Kindle, which is how I was reading it. And you all know I'm doing King Along, which is where I read a Stephen King book every single month. And I DNF'd it at 380 pages. I had previously read this one. It's not a new read for me. And I think I found out the reason, or I figured out the reason why I didn't enjoy it as much, was because I was reading it on my Kindle, and for some reason I'm just finding that when I read books on my Kindle I enjoy them so much less. So what I have decided to do, and it's a decision I've made, in fact right now as I'm filming this I am actually currently rereading it. Basically I decided to buy myself a physical copy, and I've kind of taken the pressure off myself, so I'm not actually going to be vlogging the King Along anymore. I'm going to be talking about them. I'm contemplating doing like a review video each time I've read one, so let me know if that's something that you would be interested in. But I want to do I'm trying to read them alongside other books. I'm going to deliberately read them on audiobook alongside me physically reading them, because I just think that for me it's the way that I enjoy reading Stephen King much more, and so that's how I've decided to do it. I am currently about the same place that I DNF'd. I'm currently reading on audiobook. I'm currently at that point now, and I'm actually enjoying it so much more, so it's definitely the Kindle that did it for me, I think. So yes, I am, although I DNF'd it and I have counted it, the only reason I've counted it in this is because I read 380 pages, so I've counted it in my page count, so I had to obviously count it on my spreadsheet, but it obviously is also a book that I am reading again, so you'll see it again in my hopefully June wrap up, but I may not quite finish it in June because it's right at the end of the month, so it may be in July's, but who knows. Next up was the first book that I picked for my Mental Healthathon TBR, and this was, I believe I picked this for the YA prompt. It wasn't the book that I intended on reading for it, but it ended up being the one I went for, and this was another reread that I listened to on audiobook, and this was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first book in the Six of Crows duology, the sequel being Crooked Kingdom, which I've also read in the past and really enjoyed. Gave this a 5-star the first time I read it, and I gave it a 5-star the second time I read it. I loved this book. This book follows 6 people who kind of are under the care, I guess, or under the guidance of Kaz Brekker, who is the kind of leader of the Misfits, as he would call himself, I'm sure. And he is hired essentially to try and get a hostage, or take a hostage from the Ice Court, which is a place that has never been breached, it's never been broken into, and they're trying to retrieve him, or this hostage. And it's amazing. I love the relationships in this. Nina as a character is amazing. I love all of the characters, to be honest. I just think they're all amazing. I know this is supposed to be being a TV series soon on Netflix, so I'm really interested in how that goes. Yeah, I love this. I'm so glad I reread this one as well. I'm thinking about rereading Crooked Kingdom again, but I know I didn't love it as much as this one, so I'm not like chomping at the bit to do that. Loved this though. I'm absolutely so glad I read this, and I also really enjoyed the kind of claustrophobia and also kind of like PTSD mental health representation in this. I think it's really interesting to see it in a fantasy setting and to see it as something that a character deals with, but it's not the main plot line. Really enjoyed that. I think it's done really, really well. So yeah, highly recommend. Next up, we have another one I have a little bit of a story about. We have the Bane Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Rees Brennan and Maureen Johnson. Cassandra Clare wrote the Mortal Instruments series, and this is a book of short stories about Magnus Bane, who appears in that series. Now you may notice there is a bookmark in this, and that's because I DNF'd this book. So I DNF'd this one at page 72, so I literally read the first story and then I started to read the second one and I just wasn't feeling it. And it's because I've made a decision on this as well, in that I've decided to reread the entirety of the Mortal Instruments / Infernal Devices, like the whole Shadowhunter Chronicles world. I'm reading them in like timeline order. There are some I've read obviously and some I haven't. I found this on the Infernal Devices Goodreads, like the series page. I'll link down below the link, and it's basically a timeline of all of the books in order throughout the whole series. There are loads I haven't read and some I have. And so what I've decided to do is, you'll see again in my June wrap up, because I have just finished it, I'm going to be reading them in, I'm not reading this as one book, I'm reading each of the stories as a book and like reading it as a separate like thing in the timeline. So because not all of them, so like these books are split up, so I think you read like 3 of them and then you read some of the actual novels and then you come back to this. So I'm going to be doing that. So I've actually read the first book in this for my June TBR, so for my June wrap up, so you'll see that next week. But yeah, I DNF'd this at 72 pages. Again, I had to include it on my spreadsheet because I obviously want to get the pages that I've read, but I DNF'd this book just because I wasn't feeling reading the whole thing in one. I liked what I did read, but it just wasn't really for me. So anyway, like I say, you'll find out more of my thoughts on the first story next week, but that is the decision I've made. So obviously wanted to talk about it, but I don't want to go into it too much. Yes? Oh, okay.
So all of your fans have
so when I'm filming this, it is currently Sunday and it's my birthday on Wednesday, and these have just arrived at the door. Okay, you can place them somewhere.
Just to make you aware.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited. I'm not opening them until my birthday though, which is a little bit like I've got 3 days. So you will see a haul that I'll be doing, and I might do like a live, like not live, but like me opening them. So yes, I'm actually stunned. So thank you for anyone who sent me things, because that's amazing. Anyhow, next up, what do we have next? Next up, we have a book that I was sent by Trigger Publishing, who very kindly sent me an e-arc of How Can I Help? 8 Ways You Can Support Someone You Care About with Anxiety or Obsessional Problems by Lauren Callahan. And this is a relatively short book. It's kind of like a self-help, I guess, but it's about how you help somebody else with anxiety and other problems. Now, the thing I found, and I give this one a 3-star, and it's only because this book is really not for me. And when I say it's not for me, I actually mean it's physically not for me. I am somebody who has anxiety and obsessional problems, so I don't think that a book written from the perspective of somebody telling somebody close to me how to help me is that helpful for me, if that makes sense. It just wasn't my book. It wasn't written with me in mind, and so I struggled with it only because I felt like I'm sure it'd be very helpful for somebody who is having to then help other people, if that makes sense. But for somebody who has those issues, it felt like it was very like unpersonalized. What's the word? Like depersonalized, is that the word? Where it was like talking, almost like it felt like someone was talking about me, like amongst themselves. It's kind of weird. And I found myself getting a little bit offended a couple of times, but only, like I said, it's only because it's not written with me in mind. And I think it was really well, like there was lots of different points, and it was really well like structured. And I think it's also a book, like I said, that would be very helpful for certain people, but for me, it just really wasn't for me, if that makes any sense. So thank you again to Trigger Publishing for sending that to me. I highly recommend it to anybody who is trying to help somebody else who has anxiety or obsessional problems and doesn't really know how to go about that. So yeah, I would highly recommend it for that reason. Next up, we have a book that, again, unfortunately, I DNF'd. This was actually a buddy read that I did with the lovely Nicole from A Beautiful Chaos of Books, and this is Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. I was really excited to read this. I'd heard great things about it. I think Victoria, from What Victoria Read, has talked about this book before, and I'm not doubting this as a great book. I DNF'd this after how long? 80 pages. It was on day 2 of our readathon, and the only reason why I DNF'd it was because this was really, really triggering for me. This talks a lot about eating, like disordered eating, shall we say, and I, as somebody who has as someone who has kind of recovered from an eating disorder, it was very, very close to the bone and on the nose, and I couldn't read it. It just got a bit too much for me. But I think that if you don't have those issues, I think this would be a really interesting read. This follows a kind of school where women or girls are trained to be one of 3 things. They are either a companion, a concubine, or chastity, and the men decide. And it's kind of about that, like, it does definitely have Handmaid's Tale vibes. I really like, actually, it says Mean Girls meets The Handmaid's Tale, and from the bit I read, it was definitely that. Like I said, it was unfortunately just a bit triggering for me, and I really couldn't, I found myself very uncomfortable reading it, and yeah, it really triggered me. So unfortunately I had to put this one down, but thank you to Nicole for being so lovely about it. And also I would recommend this if you don't have those issues, like I said, but if you are planning on reading this and you do, then I would very much step lightly, because yeah, it was too much for me. Next up, I took part in the Books for the Brave readathon, which was hosted by Victoria from What Victoria Read, Leanne from Literary Diversions, and Emma from Drinking by My my shelf, and the three of them hosted a readathon that was to raise money for the NHS, basically, or a charity that helps the NHS. And they did a readathon where basically there was 3 books. I think there was 3 prompts you had to read, and it was a week-long readathon, and I really, really enjoyed it. The first book I read for it was The World's Wife by Caroline Duffy. This is a poetry collection, and I read this for the book that intimidates you, because it's poetry, which very much intimidates me. And I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I just couldn't connect to it at all. I just found it really, dare I say, boring? I'm really sorry. I think that poetry isn't really my thing. I would love you to recommend me poetry collections that are easy to read, because I just felt like, I mean, this was easy, like the words weren't difficult, but I didn't really get anything from it, which was really sad. I've seen Caroline Duffy in person. She was at a talk that I did when I was at school, and I really enjoyed her then, but yeah, it just really wasn't for me. So although it was a quick read, because like it's poetry, so there's like not very much on a page, you know, but yeah, I didn't enjoy it. But I did read it for the readathon, so it was quite a quick read, and it was one down pretty quickly starting the readathon off. Then we have my final DNF of the month, and this is another one that I was actually really surprised by. I hope to read this for the Books for the Brave readathon, but unfortunately I really just couldn't get into it. And this is Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly, and I really wanted to read this one. This is a story about the 3 women, the African American women who essentially helped win the space race, and nobody really knows their stories, and it says genius has no race, strength has no gender, courage has no limit. So it talks about racism, it talks about sexism, it talks about lots and lots of things, and I really wanted to read this and love it. I think, how much did I read of this? I read 50 pages, so I really pushed through. I was trying my best, but the reason why I didn't enjoy this one, and it's not the story, and I do still really want to find out more about these 3 women. I will probably watch the movie as well, just because I think it will still teach me about the women as well. The only reason I didn't love this, I just think the writing in it was a little bit too dense for me. There was lots of very like specialized language. It was talking a lot about like the mathematician side of things, talking about the science, and it didn't go into my brain. I just honestly felt like I was just like, I don't know. I felt like I was trying, and I was reading like a textbook, and I was just really trying to get through it, but I just couldn't find it, and I just couldn't work it out, and I felt really bad after. I didn't want to DNF this, but unfortunately that was how it had to be. I'm really sad about that, but yeah, I'm hoping to still learn more about these women, because I think what they did was amazing. I think they were just absolute pioneers, and yeah, I really do want to know more about them, so hopefully I'll be able to watch the movie and learn a little bit about them as well. So the next book I read, I actually crossed over the MentalHealthathon and the Books for the Brave. For Books for the Brave, I read this for a book with a brave main character, and I also read this for the non-fiction side of MentalHealthathon. And the reason I said this was a brave main character is because I think the author who wrote this is non-fiction, is incredibly brave, and I've read a lot about him, and I've very much enjoyed what I have read. This is Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. This one I gave a 4-star, and I really enjoyed this. Also, the cover, or the spine, like, look at that. Is that not just the most beautiful book you've ever seen? And I mean, the actual jacket itself is gorgeous too. Like, I really enjoyed this cover, but something about that, like underneath, oh, I can't even get it off now. Anyway, something about that just really excites me. So this is a kind of collection of short little bits, I guess, talking about how we can stay sane when the planet has gone mad, basically, and how, you know, living in a world that's so fast paced and so like technologically minded, how we can still like decrease our anxiety, stop from being quite so stressed, etc. And I think this was just really honest, and I really enjoyed it. I followed Matt Haig on Twitter for a really long time, and I really enjoy what he has to say on there. And there was a few things in here where I was like, oh, I'm not really sure where he's going with that. But everything else he wrote, I just thought was so wonderful. He had some really great ideas, talks a lot about like the internet and like things to think about and goals to have, etc. And I really loved it. I think it was really well done. I gave it a 4-star in the end. It just felt like something I wanted to read alongside other things. I think it was a great month to read this for the Mental Healthathon, and yeah, I think it's definitely something that I will remember. And a massive thank you to Charlie. Charlie gave me this book, so thank you, Charlie. Next up, you guys, I finally read this book. I read this for the NH and S prompt, which was to read a book that started with one of those letters. This one starts with an S. This is Sweet Pea by CJ Skews, and oh my goodness me, I am so glad I read this. I've been being told for ages by Leanne, by Victoria, by Nicole that I need to read this book. Oh, I loved it. It was a 5-star from me all the way. I actually read parts of this out to AJ because it was just so good, and I just couldn't, I don't even understand. I think Victoria recently mentioned that she actually listened to an audiobook of this recently, so I feel like I need to do that as well because I think this would be great on audio. This one is a kind of thriller, I guess. This one is a thriller that basically follows Rhiannon Lewis is kind of the average girl next door. She does all the things that you would expect. She kind of holds her tongue, she behaves herself, but she's actually she's got a bit of a secret, and that secret is she's actually a serial killer, and she very much enjoys that. She finds that if she doesn't kill somebody, after a while she starts to get a bit restless and needs to. I love the fact that at the beginning of each chapter there is literally a list of the people that currently are at the top of her list of people to kill and the people that she just wants to. Like, for example, let me find one, like a random one, shall we? Let's have a look. So we have people who don't indicate a roundabouts. I mean, that's annoying for everybody. But yes, that was just, this is so funny, so good. I'm desperately wanting to get onto the second one, although I've heard not so great things about that one. But I am still really intrigued. I really want to get back into Rhiannon's life. I think the ending of this was very, like, I wish that it kind of hadn't quite ended the way it had. That's the only kind of downside I had of it, but it has made me really want to read the sequel, so I'm really wanting to find out what happens. So the In Bloom is the second one, which I do own, so hopefully I will get to that one at some point. Next up, I read a book on my Kindle, and this one was for the prompt Learn More, which was to read a book about a mental health issue that you want to learn more about. So I chose bipolar for this one. I didn't really know too much about bipolar, and I read Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher played Leia from Star Wars, Princess Leia, and I don't really know too much about her life, so I gave this one a 3-star in the end. I think the memoir was really interesting, and the bipolar stuff in it was very, very interesting to read, and I did learn quite a bit about it. What I didn't love so much is the fact I don't really know much about Carrie Fisher's life in general. Like, I don't have a lot of background knowledge of her relationships and about, you know, the other things in her life, and I feel like it very much was like whizzing through quickly, like the people she'd married and like the kids that she had and the friends that she had, and I didn't really know anything about her life, and I felt like you needed to know those things before you went into reading this. I think if you knew more about her, you would probably get more from this than I did. Like I said, the bipolar stuff I really did find interesting, and obviously I didn't really need to know too much of her history in order to acknowledge that. But yeah, I do think that if you know a lot about Carrie Fisher, or you have a sort of big interest in her, this is going to be more interesting and impactful to you, because like I said, I just kind of was a bit distant from it. I did read it really quickly though, so I mean, it was great. It was an interesting read, but yeah, I didn't particularly love it. Next up, I read this book for the most recent, I think like the most recent mental health book I'd added to my TBR. This was It's Not Okay to Feel Blue and Other Lies by Scarlett Curtis. I was sent this one, but I don't know who by, because I still don't know who actually sent me this. This is a massive collection of essays and like short poems, and also just little things that people have written. Lots of different activists, celebrities, writers, all different people. There are so many people in this, and I gave this one, I think, a 4-star. Did I give this a 4-star? Yeah, I gave this a 4-star. It was interesting. I do think that it was curated in a way that meant that you kept reading and different things were being said, and I really enjoyed the sections that it was placed into. So you have, it's okay to not be okay, it's okay not to be okay, it's okay to shout, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to ask for help, it will be okay, and then Last Words by Scarlett Curtis. So I did enjoy that. but I did think that there were definitely stories in this that were, or sections in this that were much weaker. There was a few that I was kind of confused why they were really in this, because they didn't feel very mental health to me. But yeah, I was very much enjoyed this one. It's definitely something that I feel like you have to dip in and out of. I did read this more as kind of a I read quite big chunks of it at a time, and maybe that's not what I would do in the future. But yeah, it's definitely a book that I would recommend. I do really want to read the Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies, because I think this was really well done by Scarlett Curtis, and I admire what she's done. But yeah, I did enjoy this. I would recommend if you haven't read this one. I also think though, like, don't necessarily read this as a book, as in like through the whole thing. I would say dip in and out of it throughout like a month or something. I think that would be really interesting. So yeah, I did enjoy this though. Then the penultimate book that I read in May was A Window Breaks by C.M. Ewan. Leanne picked this one for me to read, and I did enjoy it. It was a 3-star read for me in the end. This follows a family who, after kind of a tragedy of some kind, they end up in a house that they have been left to stay in. A friend of theirs has let them stay in this house, and basically they are staying there to kind of come back together and to join together as a family again. And then they hear somebody break into the house, and it goes from there. It follows that story from the person who's breaking into what they're doing, what the situation is. There's lots of secrets and things happening, and I did enjoy it. There was a lot of suspense. I didn't love the ending to this book, I have to say. I did find it a little bit, I don't know, it just didn't really make a lot of sense. There was a lot of things in this that I just didn't quite like, and I wish that I enjoyed this more. I do think it's definitely an interesting one. It's not necessarily something that I would have seen coming, but I also think it's a little bit preposterous, so it didn't really fully make sense. But yeah, I would be interested in hearing what other people have to say about this one, because yeah, it was interesting. This was also an ARC that I was sent, so a massive thank you to the publisher for sending it to me. But yeah, I didn't love it. And then the final book that I read in the month of May was Shadows of the Workhouse by Jennifer Worth. This is the second book. Yeah, this is the second book to the Call the Midwife trilogy. And this is probably my favourite one of the lot. I think I enjoyed this more than Call the Midwife, and I definitely enjoyed it more than Farewell to the East End. I do still have to read In the Midst of Life, but this one for me was probably, yeah, I think it was my favourite actually. I think that's because, so when I read the third book in the series, because that's the one I actually started with, Farewell to the East End, because I knew it was part of the Call the Midwife series, I was expecting lots of midwifery, and there really isn't very much in Farewell to the East End. And then I read Call the Midwife, and again, it's not very like, it is midwifery based, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of it in there, but it's not, like, it's probably like 50% of the book, right, rather than what I was expecting it to be like 100% of. So when I went into this, I think I knew that it wasn't going to be like solely that, so I think my expectations for this were a little bit different. And because it's called Shadows of the Workhouse, that's exactly what it's about. It's about the workhouse. It's set in the 1950s. And it is about Jennifer Worth, who is a midwife, and she it's about her experiences with the people who lived around her at that time. And I think there's 3 stories in this. So this is set in like 3 different sections. The first section follows brother and sister Peggy and Frank, and they were separated in the workhouse when their parents died, and it follows it talks about what happened to them throughout the period of times of being in the workhouse, and how they then eventually came back together again. And in amongst that one, it also talks about Jane, who was also in the workhouse at the time, who was friends with Peggy, and kind of again about her relationship. It also, the second part is about Sister Monica Joan, who is in the other books as well, but it's about how she was summoned to the High Court because of being accused of theft. And it's very much interesting, talking about her relationship with Jennifer Worth. And then the third section is about John Collett, I think was his name. Let me just check. Yes, Joseph Collett, sorry, not John. Joseph Collett, who it's about how because one of the things that Jennifer Worth did was she was a nurse as well as a midwife, so she went to change his bandages a lot, and it was about her like hearing his story and that kind of thing. And again, all of the stories have things to do with the workhouse in it. And I just think this book was really well done. My heart was breaking throughout. I think the workhouses sound like absolutely horrendous places, and I do not like, I can't even imagine it. But this was a 4-star read for me, so definitely my favourite of the 3. And I'm really glad I read this. But there you are, guys. That is the 14 books I read. There you are, guys. That is the 14 books that I read in the month of May. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope you don't mind that it was kind of late. Like I said, let me know what you read in May as well, and what your favourite and least favourite books of the month were. As I said, next Monday there will be my June wrap up, so you'll see what I read in the month of June, which, if I'm honest, I'm going to be honest and say it was a little bit less than May. However, I still have a couple of days left of June, so maybe I'll read some more. But yes, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for another video. Bye guys, stay safe.